difference. No, it does say live now, but I'm not seeing your camera.
Huh.
Now that's a little bizarre.
Yeah, I don't know why it worked before and it's not now, but
The wonders of
technology.
well,
I honestly
like I
don't
said,
care.
technology is a love-hate relationship, like I say.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I don't care if my picture shows up if you don't care.
No, that's fine. Um, so anyway,
Well, then I'm just
is is this a test or is this going to be our first broadcast?
I think we got to get this done. Let's just do this as our first broadcast and apologize to everybody right now that we're techno-tards and we're still trying to figure this out.
I like that.
So,
I like that term. I like that term. I'm going to have to get me a t-shirt that says Technotard on it instead of one that says more cowbell.
oh, very good. Well, I'm just going to go ahead and lead out.
Okay.
I'm Reverend Jody from Jody Speaks.
And this is Stephen Odell. We'll get into qualifications later. You know, it's kind of like a shotgun blast. You know, I do a bit of this, a bit of that, and a bit of something else. And
absolutely. Well, we want to welcome you.
This is a Transformation Diary, or at least it's intended to be. We'll see how long it lasts and how big an audience we gain. And it's something we're excited about, though.
Very much so. And this is just an introduction to let you know exactly what our intentions are with this, kind of our vision for this project, and kind of see where we go from there. So, Stephen, why don't you lead out and tell them kind of about your background?
Well, my background I've always been interested, even since very, very young, in music, art, and science. Those were my three big areas. So I had a natural curiosity to learn how things worked. My parents used to shake their heads a lot and wag their finger at me because I was, even as a kid, one of these ones who would, you know, get a screwdriver and take things apart to see how they worked. I wasn't so good at putting them back together afterward, though. And I joked that if I could take the universe apart and see how it worked, you know, I probably wouldn't be able to get that back together either. But the natural curiosity that I have has led me to do a lot of research over the years. As far as work and so forth, I've been a welder. I've done landscaping for a short time. I've done satellite TV installation. I've done sign painting and design, quite a number of different things. If I had to go through it all, the training I had a couple years of college, Associate of Arts and Sciences degree, which hasn't served me all that well so far. I have done quite a number of things as far as training in other areas. I took radiation and hazardous waste handling training and flagging and for highways and so forth, and just a weird number of things that don't all seem to go together but made sense to me at the time. Currently, for the last several years, I've been doing a lot of writing. Really finally found my niche, I believe, and I have a lot of works that are ready for publication at this point, but with the market the way it is and having to learn how to go about doing it myself, it's a little more difficult than it would normally be in a good economy. But this particular book that Reverend Jody and I are working on right now is called Care and Feeding of the Sexual Female, or How to Unleash the Sex Goddess in Your Woman. And this is something that we are very, very excited about doing. We feel that there are a lot of clueless men out there who really need to understand the female psyche better. A lot of women wish that men understood, you know, what the differences are in their needs in romance and dating, communications, many, many things like this, and especially even in sex relationships in the bedroom. This is something that a lot of men want to learn, but they really don't have a clue as to the differences of how men and women think, and the differences sometimes in how they communicate. And so I believe that communication is probably the first topic that we perhaps ought to cover. Back to you.
Well, my background is I came, I guess, most significantly from the investment world, and then transitioned, of all things, into the nonprofit world, where I kind of launched off my speaking career. I have been a public speaker since 1999 and have done a variety of different topics and done it in a variety of different venues. A lot in the business world, so I've had a lot of hands-on in the business world, and then decided to launch my own business. I wanted to have my own speaking business. I really didn't know what direction I wanted to take with it at first, and it's kind of become an animal all of its own. I've studied for many years the law of attraction, and I love teaching people about how that works, not just the theories of it, but the actual practical application of it. And I began doing speaking engagements based on the law of attraction, and then attracted somebody into my world that asked me to do some workshops with him. And from there, he's a tantrika. He also is an EFT practitioner, and is the founder of the Divine Pollination and Free with EFT, Nathan Martin, who kind of became my mentor in the work of using EFT and also learning Tantra, and it evolved into to teach some workshops on sexuality. And Stephen happened to notice that I was doing workshops on sexuality and asked me to participate in this book with him. It definitely wasn't the vision for my business. However, it's something that I'm very passionate about, and for whatever reason, it seems to be a comfort area for people to come to me. And so I absolutely love when I can help folks in learning more about sexuality, but it is just an addendum, if you will, to the law of attraction. And the reason I've decided to incorporate this into my practice is because the whole simplicity of the law of attraction is to be happy, and sex is a big part of that. And so it's also something that's very healing as well, which is something needed to get people to this point. So I felt that it was an important component to have as part of the business, and that's what I'm really here to bring to you is how you be able to attract everything you want in this life, and what kind of tools are going to be necessary to help you get there. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. And Stephen, what would you say your vision is for this project?
Well, first of all, before we get to that, for the benefit of those listening, you might want to explain what EFT is, what it stands for.
Oh, certainly. It's emotional freedom therapy, or also known as tapping. And so it's a way of doing work with the meridian points and energy work in order to release some of the barriers that are keeping us from attaining the things that we want.
Mm-hmm. Well, now, let me say, for the benefit of the listening audience, too, that at one time, I probably would have said that a lot of that was just, hokum and not believed in it. But some of the videos that I've seen about energy transference and so forth without touching anyone, it has been just absolutely incredible. It has really astounded me. I've opened up my, I guess you could say, my belief system, and give a lot more credibility to things that perhaps at one time that I would not have done so. And some of that has been because of my studies in such things as hypnosis and the effect that the mind can have, just by having the positive thinking in your corner, for example, and which of course has a lot to do with the law of attraction as well. But these are things that I think are just we're on the very verge, just on the threshold of these things. We haven't really stepped into the room yet to begin practicing these things the way that we should. And I think it would be wonderful if, as a child grew up, they were taught a number of these things so that they became whole as a being. We really don't have that right now. I think we're only a portion of what our real potential is as human beings. I believe we have a spark of divinity in us, that we have the same Father and Mother in heaven, and that we are all children of God, and that we have the ability to become much more than what we are right now, but we just don't see it. We have wings and we have feathers, and we haven't discovered them yet and how to use them to fly, and to get off this ground. Now, as far as where I would like to see this going, I taught classes in church and that over the years, and have taught guitar lessons and various other things. And so I happen to have had the opportunity to speak before large groups at times, and I have learned one thing particularly, and that is that it isn't all upon the instructor or the one leading the class to make the class good. It has to do with participation. And so what I really would love to see is for those who are listening to get over any fear that they may have, and actually at some point call in, participate in this, ask questions, and receive answers. And it will make it much, much more productive for all of us. Because I won't pretend that I know everything, and I know that you don't pretend that either. And there are people who may call in, and they will teach us something as well, and then we'll all benefit from it. So that's what I really see for it, is that it will be a great group participation project, and that the real transformation will come from that participation.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to touch on a couple of things, some of the methodologies that we'll talk about, like, I practice Tantra and EFT. These all come from the East. They're really only new to the West, but we're starting to incorporate them now, and people are just really starting to understand the power that these things have. With EFT, it's really a combination of Western psychology and Eastern acupressure.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's really something that's been around for a long time, but it's very effective, and it can be used for any blocks. Just to tell you how simplistic it can be, I worked with a gal one time that just all of a sudden found she was being evicted, and for no reason. She was a good tenant, paid her rent on time, kept the place very clean, but the landlord just decided it was time for her to go, and she was in a panic because she had no idea where she was going to go. And so I worked on a tapping session with her, and the next day she sent me a message and said, "You don't know what a difference that made. I feel so relieved, and I'm not scared anymore, and I know that I can handle whatever happens next." Mm-hmm. Now that's something, yeah, it's really scary in the moment, but it's not a huge catastrophe. But it can be used for healing. I use it anytime I have a headache. I don't take medications for a headache. It can be used for pain. It can be used for addiction, all kinds of things. But it does come from a very ancient medicine. So I wanted to touch on that part. But I also wanted to echo Stephen in saying that the real benefit from this program that we're doing here is going to come from participation and people getting actively involved. And he already said it, but I'll agree, I don't know everything. I'm going to probably learn as much from you as you will learn from me. We're going to have guests that will come in, and an exciting line of people that have agreed to be on the show. And we are going to cover just an amazing range of topics. But the whole point of this show, in my opinion, is that you will see some real positive change in your life. And we call it the Transformation Diaries because we want to know your stories. We want to know how things have really changed your life by the things that you've learned here or by things that you've learned before that you're going to share here. So, you know, your participation in this is going to mean as much to others as it means to us and yourself.
Oh, absolutely. You know, you mentioned briefly like acupressure and acupuncture, that type of thing. And at one time, that was brand new, you know, to the Western medicine as well. And a lot of them said that it was just, you know, witchcraft, voodoo, whatever. That was all in their head. That it was more psychological than physiological. But the fact of the matter is that it really can make a huge difference. I had a friend once who went through something. I'd always heard the term muscle memory, and I didn't know exactly what that meant. I just thought, you know, that perhaps what it dealt with was like athletes, you know, after a number of repetitions that they do things automatically. For example, you know, maybe in martial arts, you know, that you've learned how to block and defend and how to punch and respond. And it's become second nature. You know, you do it without even thinking, like learning how to drive a stick shift on an automobile or how to ride a bicycle. You do it automatically and don't think about the motions anymore. But he actually had a situation where he had a pain, a sharp pain that shot through a certain portion of his body, and he said a thought came through his mind, a memory, as if he was there and living it again. It was so vivid. And so there is such a thing as muscle memory. Apparently the cells of the muscle, I don't know that they actually store the memory, but it certainly sparks something in his brain. And this again comes back to believing that we are capable of much, much more than what we even realize. I think we were designed to, let's just say we're in embryo right now. Even as adults, we are still spiritually and emotionally, in many ways, in embryo yet, and we have a long way to go before we fully grow and become free of worries and error and all of those things that you've mentioned. Now, I have this idea in mind and this dream that wouldn't it be wonderful if every child could be raised right from the start to develop all of these potentials that they have. You know, we hear of people who have done not only speed reading, for example, but photo reading. John F. Kennedy apparently could run his finger down a page within a second or two and be on the next page running his finger down it and go page after page after page, and then you question him on this, and he could not only tell you exactly what the words were, but what page it was on and which quadrant of the page and so forth. And this tells me that our capabilities, our potentials are far, far more than we may be giving ourselves credit for, that it's maybe our belief system that is limiting what we are able to accomplish and what we're able to do. Studies that have gone on, I know at least behind the Iron Curtain at one time, in telepathy and psychokinesis and all these various things. It's absolutely fascinating to me. But the question is, how many people have actually put it to use, you know, and made it work? Sometimes the simplest things that we dismiss out of hand are actually some of the very most wonderful things that we could apply in our lives and actually accomplish the goals that we're looking for.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I've yacked enough for a moment. It's your turn.
Well, and some of the practices that we'll be talking about here, through my years of studying the law of attraction, what I have found is that these are practices that have been used by the wealthiest people in the world for years and years and years. Napoleon Hill wrote in his book, and
Think and Grow Rich.
But he wrote in his book about sex transmutation. But what a lot of people don't know is that he studied and practiced Tantra, and he realized the power of sexual energy and incorporated that. Today, you look at some of the wealthiest people out there, they understand the power of sex transmutation. They also understand, most of them are practicing EFT. Bob Proctor is one of the most successful motivational speakers out there, and he's a huge proponent of EFT. Louise Hay is also very well known for her publishing house and several of the books that she has written. She's a big practitioner of EFT. But you do look at some of the wealthiest people out there, and they understand these concepts. These are things that have been used for many years. I mean, Napoleon Hill's book is quite old. These things have been known about for years within certain communities. Really, what I want to see happen is my voice can get heard out there to, Joe Schmo, that he too can have everything out there. What you want wants you. You just need to figure out how you get it. Well, that's what I'm here to help do, is show you how you can make these things happen.
Well, what's interesting, you mentioned Napoleon Hill, and a lot of people are only familiar with that book, Think and Grow Rich. They don't realize that that was somewhat of a distillation and a huge abridgment of a number of volumes that he actually wrote. It was something like 16 volumes, I believe, on these things. And what he had done was he had gone to some of the most wealthy and successful people in the world, and he had interviewed them and literally followed them around for quite some time and
20 years, in fact.
Yeah, I'm sorry, how many?
20 years that he spent doing research for that.
20 years.
Yeah.
Well, you stop and you think about this, a person, investing 20 years of their own time, to go around and do this kind of research, to follow these people around, to interview them, to pick their brains. That speaks very highly of him as well. And he went from being, as I understand, fairly penniless to becoming a very wealthy man himself by applying the principles that he learned from these people. And it's a wonderful thing to realize that there are far many more volumes that he wrote, and that if we will make those available to ourselves and put them into practice, that we can learn those very same principles, because he has recorded them for us.
Well, and to give you a little history behind the abridgment of that, and I hate to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but all of these concepts were meant to keep secret from the masses. His book was very watered down because the controlling parties really did the abridgment. He had wrote his original versions, and they took out a lot of stuff that they didn't want the masses to know. And so that's why it ended up in that version. It's hard to find, but you can find the original version of that book. I've never seen it myself, but I know it's out there. But that's where part of the problem come in, is because
I was actually able to find and download all 16 volumes, and I can't remember exactly where the site was, to tell you the truth. And I did get started on reading it at one point, but then of course I got distracted into doing a lot of writing again. So that took up my time. But it is available. It can be found. And I don't recall whether it was like through something like Gutenberg Press or that type of thing, which is open source, you know, and available to the public. But I did certainly find it, all 16 volumes, and it is available. You can download it. It doesn't have any pretty pictures or anything like that, and it does go into very great detail on these principles.
Well, and you know what I'll say is it's not knowledgeably available, if you will, because people just don't know about it. You know, they didn't want you to know about it, and so this thing isn't. You know, people don't know that it exists. You can find anything you want, but you know the whole point. If you want transformation to happen, you're going to have to do some work on your part. And so, just as going about finding those 16 volumes, you're going to have to work to find it. Well, you're going to have to do work, period, if you want to see transformation. It doesn't just happen to you. One of the misnomers about the law of attraction is that a lot of people out there will say it doesn't work. It doesn't work. Well, it doesn't work if you don't work. They sit around and think, you know, if I think happy thoughts, then everything wonderful in the world is going to happen to me. Well, no, it's not. You've got to do your part in this. So, but it's available to you. Anything you want is available and waiting for you to invite it in.
Right. Well, I remember reading something once where it said, "Nothing shall be withheld from them which they shall imagine to do." Now, and I really think that our limitations are our imagination, that we limit ourselves. People such as Joe Vitale, for example, who is very, very good at online sales and who is a public speaker himself and has written a number of works with other people and by himself. He practices this type of thing as well. The law of attraction is very, very deeply into it. Now, when I first started reading the things that Joe Vitale was writing about it, I put it into practice myself, and I think it was more accidental. You know, it hasn't become what you'd call habit with me yet, and that's unfortunate. They say anything that you persist in doing for at least 21 days can become habit, and I haven't put that into that habit region yet, into that zone. But what I did that very first night that I read some of his work is I said to myself, okay, the job that I am in right now, I don't like it. It doesn't pay as much as I want. Within 30 days, I'm going to have another job that will pay twice as much and that I will enjoy a lot more. And literally, now a lot of people may say this is coincidence, but literally within 10 minutes, I had a housemate knock on the door of my room and say, I heard about a job that you might be interested in. Now, he didn't even know I was looking for one. I hadn't said anything, and yet here he was within 10 minutes knocking at the door. And within 2 weeks, I had that job, and it was paying twice what I had been making at the other job. Now, you may call that coincidence. I don't think so. I think it was too much coincidence to be coincidence. Now, we're told that the universe is set up to receive thoughts that, you know, they talk about the ether, you know, even quantum scientists talk about the ether and so forth, that it is a medium, kind of like if we were to throw a stone into a pond or into a lake, that the ripples would go out in all directions. And this ether is kind of like that. We may call it dark matter, dark energy, whatever you want to call it, but it is evidently capacitated to receive intelligence or to receive our thoughts and become a communications path. And when we put out positive thoughts, we attract positive people and positive events. And we literally, they have shown actually in quantum science experiments that mind can affect matter. They'll take 3 totally different people, have them witness the same event, and they all see it in a totally different way. Now, it isn't that they are just perceiving it differently or have a different theory about how it works. They are actually seeing things so totally different from one another, they cannot mutually be compatible. They cannot work that way at the same time. It is impossible, and yet these people are perceiving it that way. Now, what that tells me is that they are affecting matter. Now, if we, in embryo as we are, can affect that small amount of matter, what happens then when we have actually learned to channel and utilize and maximize, magnify these powers that we have through the law of attraction? I find it ironic, for example, that we spend so much money and so much time looking for in what they call the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, while at the same time many of these so-called scientists will say that there is no God, or that there is no supreme being or supreme intelligence. Well, it seems a little ironic then that they're spending all their time and money looking for that, because I firmly believe that not only is that possible, that it is exactly a reality. Because everything that we seem to be designed for seems to be headed in that direction. Everything that we have here in our world is designed for our potential and for our use. And I don't believe that that's an accident. Now, whether you call it God, whether you call it a greater intelligence, a great spirit, or whatever you may call it, that's the universal consciousness, or whatever you might label it. That's up to the individual, of course. But it's a real shame that a lot of people are not learning how to utilize this, and these should be some of the classes that are actually taught in universities, instead of how to be a radical and cause trouble on the streets, that type of thing.
Really. Well, and we are all, everything is made of energy, everything, and so
right.
It's all connected and can be transformed.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you can have absolutely anything in your life, and there's no lack. There's only lack of the right thoughts. There's only lack of the actions.
Right.
That everything that you want is available to you, and you have because you interact with the energy that's out there, that we're all made of, that everything is made of, you have the ability to attract like energy to you. So, in fact, interesting question from the works of Abraham, who is a collective of spirits, if you want to call them, that are channeled Esther Hicks. And Esther has been channeling them since 1985. But a quote that I read recently, and I'm not giving the exact quote, I'm just paraphrasing here. Somebody had asked of Abraham, why can't someone regrow a limb then? And Abraham's answer was, because no one believes they can. Well, we didn't believe the earth was round either. We didn't believe in so many of the possibilities. When we watched Star Trek in the early days, we thought the communication device was such a radical thing. And now look at the cell phones that we have. Our whole lives are on those things.
Right.
There's a lot of things that we didn't believe. Once we have those beliefs in place, anything is possible.
Well, and then they talked about the crystals and that as a memory device. Well, look at what we have in our computers. We use silicon crystal, as a memory device. These things are not so far-fetched anymore. It's not well known, except among those who are aficionados of Nikola Tesla, but even the transport devices. Tesla actually was able to come up with something that was able to transport material objects from one point to another. And this is something, of course, that would have been suppressed, because it would be considered too dangerous for the average person to know. If we can't know what Napoleon Hill knew, then we certainly should not have at our disposal a transporter device, But it is fascinating, how much is available and how much we are limited by only our beliefs. Now, you mentioned about regrowing limbs. Well, it is well known that the liver is the only organ, apparently, that will actually regenerate itself. You can take a small amount of liver material and transplant it into someone, and it will actually grow an entire new liver. And even a damaged liver can reheal itself, you know, in many ways. And if you lost half of it, like say through a gunshot or something of that nature, it will regenerate into an entire new liver. But it is the only thing that will actually do that. Now,
only thing that we believe in at this point.
Well, they do. They have shown that under certain experiments, that electrical stimulation, for example, can cause new teeth to grow and things of that nature, and can cause limbs to regenerate. But it isn't something that's actually practiced that much. It's only been experimental in the lab so far, unfortunately.
Well, and you brought up something interesting by talking about Tesla, and maybe it's just from my vantage point, but you know, a lot of people don't know about his works and stuff. A lot of people didn't know about Napoleon Hill, but some of these things are being reintroduced. I mean, nowadays I'm hearing a lot about Tesla, and he is so far before my time. But
oh yeah,
starting to bring awareness to people, and I hope that's what we really do here, is bring a lot of awareness to you about what the possibilities are.
Well, you know, Nikola Tesla is a perfect example of, and I don't remember the rabbi's name, but a certain rabbi once said, if you're one step ahead of the people, you're a genius. If you're two steps ahead of the people, you're a crackpot. Well, Nikola Tesla was one of those ones who was the perfect example of the latter. You know, he was way more than two steps ahead of everybody in his understanding of electricity and electrical phenomena. He literally learned how to draw energy from the atmosphere and to make it limitless amounts of energy. His experiments with an automobile that he just simply plugged in a small box that he had designed himself, and he and his cousin drove around for a couple weeks at least with no gasoline, no exhaust of any kind, and people remarked on how quiet it was and that there was no smoke coming from it. And he was able to, at a time when DC batteries would deliver 45 miles per hour and had to be recharged, he was able to drive around at 90 miles per hour in this vehicle and never have to recharge it. And then you could pull the unit out, take it in the house, and use it for portable power there too. But he was drawing it literally from the atmosphere because he understood what frequency it was on and how to tune it in and so forth. And as these things, can you imagine what the world would be like if someone didn't say, all right, I want the status quo to remain as it is right now? We could have fed the world's poor already, housed everyone who needed housing, made them totally independent, and allowed them to have power at any time, or literally at their fingertips, limitless power. But because there are people who say, well, if we can't put a meter on it and make $1 on it, we aren't going to allow it to happen. The world is probably several hundred years behind what it could be. And it's unfortunate.
Yeah. You actually kind of went exactly down the road that I was going to say. You know, there are, you know, powers that be. The petroleum companies certainly don't want you running around on a little battery that takes, you know, that lasts you several weeks. There are people that profit from keeping you dumb. And so, you know.
Exactly. You know, one of the examples that I give for is, and anyone can look this up on YouTube, for example. They can look up the name John Kansas, and it's pronounced just like the state Kansas, but it's Kanzius. And some research that he did, the search term that they can put in YouTube is salt water, I think salt water on fire or something of that nature. But he learned how to take radio frequency and actually cause salt water to burn. And it's amazing the amount of heat that it gives off. And what happens apparently is that you have the dissolution or disassociation of the hydrogen and the oxygen that form the water molecule, and you release that energy and burn it as a gas that does nothing more than make a water vapor again. Now, can you imagine an automobile? And people have actually done this in their garages. They have built units called dry cells and Joe cells, and there are various words for it. But what it does is it literally disassociates plain old water into oxygen and hydrogen, and then reintroduces it into the combustion chamber in place of gasoline. Now, imagine that you have water vapor as exhaust, and if you even redistill this and cause it to come back and recycle over and over in a stainless steel system, you're not going to have any kind of exhaust whatsoever. And it's just an amazing thing that could be done. And they talk about global warming. They talk about, you know, which I don't prescribe to myself. I don't ascribe to that. And I can give logical reasons why. But the fact of the matter is, if they want clean atmosphere, that's one way to do it. But as you've said, you have the oil companies who own stock in the motor companies own stock in the oil companies, and the status quo is such that very powerful, very wealthy people say, don't rock the boat, you know, we're going to squash anything that tries to compete, anything that tries to interfere. We are going to suppress it. We could be hundreds of years ahead if these powers that be would allow that to happen. Would finance, would be on the cutting edge of actually producing the technology that would accomplish this. They could still make a buck by selling the technology, but they won't do it.
But the thing is people have to educate themselves.
Right.
Things will change when people make change. So
right.
Those that aren't of the super rich out there, you could be, but you've got to take the action to be able to get there. You've got to do the studies. You've got to make the change. You've got to question everything, and look for better ways. And you have the individual ability to make a difference.
Right. And people may say, "Well, I'm just one person. What can I do?" But the fact of the matter is that great ideas often begin with just that one person, and there's no reason why. You can look all through history, and anyone, whether they had a positive effect or a negative effect, there are some very outstanding people. You can look at Mahatma Gandhi, for example. There's one person. Mother Teresa, there's one person. Look at the effects that they had on history. Then you can also point to people like Stalin and Hitler and so forth, and maybe even the president that we have now. But then, all right, we won't go into that. I take that back. I'm nothing if not opinionated. However, the fact of the matter is that one person can often make a huge, huge difference. And you talk about people educating themselves, and again, when you look at the type of people we put into office, there's a lot of people who are not educating themselves, unfortunately. We don't know the difference anymore between a republic and a democracy, what the differences are, let alone what the pros and cons are. They don't teach those things. And we have been fed with propaganda, and we're not fighting our way out of that and saying, hey, don't keep me in the dark like a mushroom and feed me bull, because I want to think for myself. And it's only when we learn to think for ourselves that we learn how to integrate our thoughts into a much greater whole and say, look, I may be just a cog in the machine somewhere, but what I have to offer can make it run a lot smoother and a lot more efficiently. And I think that that's what we need to need to learn to do. Too many times, you know, people going into the schools, they're just being taught what to think rather than how to think. And as you've said, you know, you have to make an effort on your own. It's up to every individual. I can't force somebody to learn something that they don't want to. My mother-in-law used to say, a man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still. And, you know, they're not really convinced, you know, when you have to force them into it. I do like to debate at times, you know, and I do like to engender thought in other people. I like to incite them to think, but again, I recognize that you can't force them to. You can only plant a seed and on occasion maybe water it and hope that it grows. But the individual has to be the one to say, I want to know more about this. I want to learn. I want to improve. I want to become all that I can. And nobody can make that choice for them.
Well, to be very simple, leaders are readers.
Yeah, you're right.
You have to educate yourself.
Well,
and certainly don't count upon our systems to do that for you. You need to do it for yourself.
Right. And the one thing that I've learned about the reading is that it's not enough sometimes just to do the reading and have the book learning. You have to go out and see how it actually applies in real life. And, you know, the law of attraction is one of those things that has to be actually applied. You can't just read about the theory and say, oh, that's nice, and then put the book away and that's the end of it. It is something that begs to be applied or you will see no results. It's kind of like I tell people sometimes about, you know, finding out whether or not there is a supreme being. I said, you can't put it in a test tube all by itself and have a reaction. You have to be part of the experiment. You have to get into it. It's the same thing with the law of attraction or anything else that you learn. The book learning alone is not sufficient. You have to go out and apply it and find out where its faults and flaws are, and where you as an individual need to adapt it, because it may not work exactly the same for everybody. We all have our own specific ways of learning, our own specific ways of applying. Some people understand mathematics very, very well. To them, they're fluent in it. It's a language they're fluent in, and to the rest of us, it may be just algebra, for example, in high school. To me, it was alphabet soup. I had no idea what it was. You know, what was the real world use for it? It wasn't until I got into college that I began to understand it. Now, I still never got to a point where I was like one brother-in-law of mine who used it in his head every time that he went to the grocery store to compare the weight of something to what it cost per ounce and so forth, and he was just brilliant. But he could do that in his head. Now, I couldn't. I'm not even sure I could apply it with a calculator these days.
Amen to that. The things I learned that became useless to me.
Yeah. Well, now you make an interesting point there, too. Again, when we're talking about self-limitations, and I'm going to be revealing something about myself here. When I was in high school, I remember talking to an English teacher, and we were diagramming sentences, and it just drove me crazy. It was kind of like I had a natural ability for music, for example, and I hated playing scales, up and down, up and down. I said, teach me to play a song. Teach me Mary Had a Little Lamb, something, you know, that I can say I've accomplished something, so I can see how it all fits together. The picture worth 1,000 words. Well, when we were diagramming sentences in English class, I was doing the same type of thing. I was going crazy. I went to her and I said, look, you know, to me this is tedious, it's boring. Does it matter if I know what a noun is or what an adverb is or an adjective or any of these things, so long as I put my sentences together correctly and I communicate properly? I said, do I put my sentences together properly? Yes, you do. Do I communicate well? Yes, you do. better than the average person that I've seen in the class. I said, then why do I need to know all of these terminologies and things unless I'm going to be an English teacher, and I have no desire to be an English teacher? Well, her reaction was that I had hit her in the face with a brick, basically. I had insulted her profession, and that was the end of that. No more discussion. But the fact of the matter is that when I look at TV shows like Are You Smarter Than a Fifth Grader, you can make money by knowing those things. and I thought, how silly was I not to pay better attention,
But there's I used to joke around all the time. My former husband, he was like a savant at trivia, if you will, especially if it came to music. Just a savant. And so one day we had a friend over, and I don't remember exactly what came up in the conversation, but he came up with some trivia fact, and I said, geez, no wonder he can't pick his underwear up off the floor. He can't remember with all that useless knowledge in his brain. So out with the useless knowledge.
It is interesting, though, how many shows are being designed around trivia right now. They've got this new one with, and I can't remember the name of it. The guy from England, they call him the Beast because he has won so many different trivia contests. Man's brilliant, absolutely brilliant. But the fact of the matter is that I think a lot of that stems from basic curiosity. Because if you don't have curiosity, you're not going to study these things. You're not going to desire to remember them. And I don't think that your mind will be as able to assimilate it and keep it, because it's not important to you. I think something has to be interesting or important for you to remember it. And we're taking curiosity away from so many kids these days in the public school system. I call it the public fool system because it was designed originally, originally in America, everyone pretty much was homeschooled. If you had books available, you read them. If you couldn't get them, you borrowed them if you couldn't afford to buy them. And people taught one another. The schools were one-room schools normally, and people of all ages were there. Kids learned that somebody 5 years older than them was their peer, and the people 5 years older learned that these younger kids were their peers. They were all part of the community. They didn't pick on each other the way that they do now. It was an agrarian society for the most part, and when the time came, for harvest or planting or whatever, they all got out there and did it, whatever age they happened to be. So there was a lot more closeness, and I think education was actually valued more. Teachers were hired and fired at will by the community. They weren't protected by tenure and protected by unions and this, that, and everything else. Education was what was important. People back then were able to read and speak Latin and Greek. How many of us do that anymore? I have an aunt that she learned Latin in high school. They don't teach that anymore. By the time I was in high school, the very same high school, they didn't teach it anymore. And my understanding is that they haven't taught the proper syntax since 1923. So that would give you some thought as well as to what is their reason for not teaching the proper syntax, And then we get back into conspiracy theory, but, I won't go into that.
Well, I think, Stephen, you and I could probably both agree that we're very verbose, and we could go on forever. But we've gone off on some tangents here and make it an introduction to the show, and I think we probably ought to wrap it up.
Okay, and before we do that, would you agree that probably that maybe communication is a good place for us to start on our next show and our subject?
Yes, absolutely.
Because I believe that
And
not only... I'm sorry, go ahead.
oh, and I, I think it should be, not both general communication and also because we will be talking about sexuality, we'll touch a little bit on that as well.
Right. Because I believe that that is the foundation of any kind of relationship, whether it's a platonic relationship or whether it's a sexual relationship. It has to have communication. And we can maybe give some practical examples as well by that time. I've enjoyed this very much, and I hope that we do get a lot of participation as we go along.
Yes, me as well. And you can find the page if you on Facebook. Our page is called Transformation Diaries. You can look us up on there. And once again, I'm Reverend Jody with Jody Speaks.
Now let me give the actual specific page on that. It's facebook.com/transformation.diary. Transformation Diary, but there's a dot between those two words. So it's facebook.com/transformation.diary, and then they'll be able to go to it directly. And
okay, very good.
Thank you, Jody, and I'm Steve Odell, and I hope that in some way that this has been useful or at least interesting to those who have listened. I thank you very much, and we hope to be back another time and to make this even far greater with your participation. Thank you.
Thank you.